What's up? Breaking news. That's what's happening. Logan there, Craig here. Jahan Dotson to Philadelphia. 3 2025 draft picks in return, 2 seventh rounders, 1 third rounder, Logan, for the former first round pick. And we, I think, have been on this pretty early saying like, hey, the fit doesn't look great. Hopefully they can figure it out. But if they get the right offer, it seems like the kind of thing that Adam Peters would do. And, well, gosh darn, he did it in the division to Philadelphia. When you saw the news, what's your immediate reaction here as we're still within an hour of this breaking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that sticks out to me is just like I wasn't really surprised, and I think a lot of people are surprised when I say that. And I think it's just like you look at how everything's been handled this offseason, and credit to Adam Peters and Dan Quinn because they've done an excellent job. And I think when you look at let's start with Jamon Davis as a case study, right? Jamon Davis position switch, not looking great, but Jamon has attacked that with a uncharacteristic zeal or a characteristic zeal, and he's totally bought in. We've seen a change in Forbes, after kind of early does he fit? You've seen him change his play style and get much better. Big Phil, same thing, right? Best game we've seen him play against Miami. And all those guys were kind of, in terms of beat reporters, people were talking about trade. And I think the one thing about Jahan, and compared to those other guys, is you see a tremendous urgency to kind of adapt to the new coaching staff. And I think with Jahan, when you watch him play, again, let me just be clear. I like Jahan as a person. I like some of the stuff he does as a receiver. Obviously, I was very high on him coming out in the draft. However, when you watch him, compared to even the rest of the receivers in the room, there just seems to be a lack of urgency at times, And I think when you look at his production through practice and through the games, is he really offering that much more than a guy like Luke McCaffrey, who you've brought in? And a guy who, when you talk about Luke McCaffrey, one thing you'll never say about him is that he's not urgent. He is one of the most urgent and deliberate players I think I've ever seen as a rookie coming in. Like, he is awesome. So by keeping Jahan, are you stunting his growth? Are you stunting one of these other guys' growth? And I think when you just see such a comprehensive perspective offensively and from a team standpoint of just, hey, we're going to be urgent and physical and we're going to get after it, it becomes very clear the people that aren't doing that. And I do think, and this is just my opinion, I haven't talked to anybody in the building about this specifically, but it appeared to me that Jahan was not engaging with the new culture the way that the other players we just mentioned are and have done. So I think that's where you see the difference. And also, Philadelphia needs a third wide receiver. That's something that they've talked about extensively in their market there. And to get some value for a team that is still retooling, as Dan would kind of characterize it, I think is important. Like, if this guy doesn't fit, this is not saying Jahan's not a good football player. He just doesn't fit the cultural vision of the new organization. And when I was in San Francisco in 2017, this was a big part of it, is the GM and Kyle identifying and Adam Peters identifying these are the pieces that we're not sure if they're going to fit. We're going to give them a couple weeks to see if they buy in. If they don't, we'll move them, because then you get draft capital, and then next year you can kind of, these pieces we've just acquired in this trade are valuable for the team building process. I think we saw this last draft how effectively Adam Peters used extra draft capital to kind of maximize his draft and kind of identifying players that they want and targeting players that they want. So I think this is I'm going to say it's probably best for both parties, right? Jahan wasn't quite the cultural fit here. It allows the Commanders to get some resources back. He goes to Philadelphia, where there's an opportunity for him to see if he works and meshes with that culture, and an opportunity for him to play relatively quickly. And I think it just wasn't working out because of the new cultural feel, I would say. And I think that's something that, they identified it, they moved on, and they were able to get something in return, and hopefully found a good situation for Jahan as well.
Definitely. There's nothing more important for the 2024 Washington Commanders than fitting the cultural identity that they are trying to build. There's nothing more important than the foundation for what is next being the foundation that they want to build on. And either you're in or you're out. And I don't know why Jahan wasn't necessarily taking to this culture, because like you, I really like Jahan. And I've talked to him. I've interviewed him a couple times. Sometimes after those interviews, we've had a little bit longer chats off to the side. He's competitive. Like he's got some dog in him. Like Jahan isn't some like prima donna receiver who is soft and whatever. He's small and sometimes he gets his butt kicked as a blocker, things like that. But it really, I don't know how much of a mentality thing it is versus a physical play style. And like, if you think of, hey, Jahan Dotson, receiver, would he fit with the San Francisco 49ers? The answer is no. Like, he doesn't have the physical characteristics and doesn't play with the physicality that would be required to play for San Francisco. And that's what they're trying to build here, is that team that when you play them, you feel it for a week. And that's just not who Jahan is as a player. And I will say quickly, meanwhile, in Philadelphia, they don't really care as much about that. They want to be physical. Every team does, but it's not their whole identity. Philadelphia is a traits team. They draft based off traits. Like, let's get the fast guys. Let's get the long guys. Let's get the kind of physical, freaky, whatever, and we'll figure out the rest. And they've had enough leadership over the years from guys like Jason Kelsey and Brandon Graham and on down the list, Fletcher Cox, that they have a tough enough culture that they can take in some of those guys, and it works. I think we're now at a really interesting inflection point for the Eagles of, like, with Kelsey gone and Cox gone, like, will that still work as they bring in guys like Nolan Smith last year, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a Philly problem. They can talk about that on their podcast. For Washington, it's not a fit. And once you decide it's not a fit, a player on a rookie contract is a diminishing asset, because the less time that is left on that rookie contract, the less you are going to get in return. And Jahan this year has his base is 1.5. The prorated signing bonus is about 2. His cap hit just over 4. Next year his cap hits $5 million. Then you got to pay him. And I think that also they've probably seen Terry McLaurin and what he is and what he can do. And they're like, well, we probably want to re-up him after the year. We don't want to let him go anywhere because he's everything that we want as a player, physicality-wise, and as a leader. And then there is, of course, the elephant in the room of, like, does this open up a path to Brandon Ayuk or obviously another receiver? And sure, it does, because now you're less worried about, if Jahan fits, are we going to have to pay him in 2 years? That theoretically frees up money if you wanted to sign Ayuk to a long-term deal, and you just got an extra third-round pick to trade for him. Although I don't think that's where that's headed. I think that they'll probably now play out this year, see what happens, and then see what happens in the receiver market in general, whether it's the draft, free agency next year, see what happens with Ayuk in the long term. But regardless, they've given themselves more mobility because this is one less previous first-round pick that they're worried about re-signing. They've added a third-rounder, which is a massive, massive asset. And they also have done something they did, say, with the Sam Howell trade, where they eliminate the question that is looming over them. And it's something I appreciate that about this administration, Logan, is they are just a no drama. Not that it was a ton of drama, and it's not anybody's fault. Like, if anybody's fault, it's I guess ours, because we spend our days talking about it, but that's our jobs, so deal with it. But like, hey, this is a big talking point. Hey, this is a question. And if anything, I think it actually gives validity that it was a question for them. They've now answered it. Jahan Dotson wasn't the guy that they were hoping he would be, and so they maximized the value in return, and that's good business in the NFL.
Yeah, and I also think there's something to be said, like, if the offer wasn't right, I think they got a third-round pick, right? Like, and
third and 2 sevenths, yeah.
Like, that's not insignificant in terms of draft capital to move around. So I think, if it had been maybe a fourth or a fifth, and it wouldn't have been the right fit. But obviously, the Eagles had a need. They were willing to pay, in terms of draft capital, like what I would call something like a premium, for that. And I think that worked out too for the Commanders. So again, this is a tough thing, because I think we all have become, fans of Jahan. We all wanted to see him succeed. Again, like, I was really high on him coming out, but I do think, like, just in terms of watching practice and watching the games, like, it didn't seem like it was working out for whatever reason. And you'd have to talk to Jahan, you'd have to talk to Dan, you'd have to talk to the receiver coach about why exactly that is. But from a 1,000-foot view, I think this is probably best, right? We get younger, hungrier players, guys that definitely fit the cultural identity of this team in place to kind of grow and develop and mature and have significant playing time this year and develop that relationship with Jaden. And I think Jahan hopefully goes to greener pastures in Philadelphia. That's not how always that works out, but hopefully that's how that works out in this situation. So again, I know a lot of people, people called me and talked to me already and were really upset. But I do think, my 1,000-foot view, just observational, no insider information here, is that this feels like the right decision from a cultural standpoint for the team, and hopefully it works out best for both parties.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who's in the national media text me and like, wow, like Jaden must be upset and this and that. I was like, well, the cultural stuff, I don't know. I doubt that, I doubt that he's upset. He's barely known Jahan for a couple months. I mean, I'm sure he's got a good relationship with him because Jaden seems to have a superpower to have a good relationship with anybody. But the way I explained it to them was like, this is in some ways a free year for Washington.
Right.
Like, this is year one of a rebuild. And I think that this year is designed to see where they are. Number one, most important question, where is Jaden? Is he CJ Stroud 2.0 in terms of his timeline? Is he someone that can actually get you to the playoffs this year if he had a better roster, next year if you give him the said roster? Like, they're trying to figure that out. But there's also enough holes on the roster and question marks on the roster that you're trying to figure out. What is De'Ami Brown? Is he a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3, a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, wide receiver not on our team? Like, you're trying to figure that out this year. You're trying to figure out guys like KJ Henry. Are they solid rotational pieces for us, or do we need to invest more draft capital there? Up and down the roster, there are positions where you either have older players that are placeholders, that are great foundation builders, guys like Ertz, guys like Wagner, that when you are competing for Super Bowls, hopefully 3 to 10 years from now, that they're not going to be here just based off age. And you also have another group of players, and this will, by the way, include Terry and John Allen and like the best players on this roster that were incumbents. They're trying to figure out, are these guys good enough to be our blue chip studs, or are we going to have to invest high capital, free agent and or draft, to remake this roster around Jaden Daniels? And how long is that going to take? This is an exploratory year. And in order to explore the best they can explore in the future, they need as much asset or as many assets as they can get. And that includes cap, which now, again, you're not worried about signing Jahan in a couple of years. It doesn't free up much for now, but that's fine. And then you need draft picks. And draft picks can either be used directly on players in the draft, because that's what a draft pick is, or, as we've seen, the more draft picks you have to play with, the easier it is to move around in the draft and either move up, move back, collect more, etc. And you have an opportunity to be kind of a power broker in any draft. And Adam Peters has already proven to be pretty good at that. See what they did this year, getting Sainer Still, getting Sinnott, and moving around in that second round. I think this is a really, it's shrewd, it's smart. I think people will probably blink at the fact that it's in division, Logan. But at the end of the day, like, you have to worry about making your team as best as possible. You don't play defense on trades, you play offense. And I really commend Adam Peters for not being afraid to play offense here. And by the way, Howie Roseman, same. Like, I would say this is actually a genuinely good trade for both sides, and that's fine.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, Adam has already shown that he's willing to do that in division. He did it in the draft. And so again, I think, like, it's not, again, like you said, you're not playing defense on a trade. You're trying to maximize your assets and trying to build your organization. And again, we've talked ad nauseum about how well they've implemented this cultural identity through the draft, making sure that they had the right type of people, the Commanders type of people in the building, how they went and got the right type of free agents. Like, this is part of building a culture, right? Is kind of making some of these hard decisions. And this is not to say that Jahan is not a talented football player. It's not saying that. But again, it's just kind of what is best for the Commanders. And I think this is, ultimately, I think this is it. I go back to the urgency thing. I didn't see an urgent football player. That seems to be something that they're prioritizing. And you go down the list, like Ben Sinnott, Luke McCaffrey, OZ, like Zach Ertz, like every single person that's playing significant minutes. De'Ami Brown, the way he blocks and the urgency he's playing with him, it's just different. And again, Jahan was making some plays in practice, but it wasn't to that same level of kind of buy-in. And I think if that's happening and you've given him an opportunity to change, like we talked about the other guys that have changed, and for whatever reason it didn't click for him, and that's totally fine. And again, this is the best way to kind of maximize that resource and build the Commander organization.
For sure. Last but not least, real quickly, where does this leave them at wide receiver 2? or / wide receiver period, right? Because we did our 53, which released this morning and is now instantly dated. Oh, podcasting, it's fun, they said. But no, we know that we had 6 there, Crowder being the last one. The other 5 were fairly obvious, including Jahan. Now Dotson gone. Do we think that opens up a spot for a younger guy? Do we think that they go make a move somewhere else? Like, where does that leave the wide receiver position on this roster?
I have no idea, honestly. I think when you look at, to be totally candid, it's like I think when you look at the guys like Diame, you look at OZ, you look at Jameson, you look at Luke McCaffrey, and you look at some of those young guys, Bryson Tremaine, Mitchell Tinsley, Rosemary Jack Saint, they're playing good football. And they've made plays in practice or in preseason. And so I think what Dan said the other day is we don't really have a number 2 spot, or we're still trying to figure it out. Because I think when you look at that stable of 5 guys I just mentioned, they all bring something different to the table, right? They all bring a different superpower. And Dan's been very adamant about kind of identifying players' superpowers. I'd say Diame's going deep. OZ, the physicality underneath, the yards after catch, right? Jameson Crowder, that kind of veteran savvy. Luke McCaffrey, the urgency and the physicality that he plays and practices with. You can get something going there. And I think what I would say is you can get that going, but don't forget about Zach Ertz and how absolutely prolific he's been during training camp, right? It's been Terry McLaurin and Zach. And I think with the emergence of a guy like Ben Sinnott, this allows those younger resources to grow in the organization. So that's what I would anticipate for the receiver room. I'd also say, hey man, we got Austin Eckler for a reason. He's one of the best pass catching backs, in the last 10 years of the NFL. So there are resources here. It just might not look like, hey, 1-2 receiver. It might look like 1, and then we got 2A, 2B, 2C, and then we kind of intermix those at the right time, with Zach Ertz being the second receiving option. You know what I'm saying? And again, I don't know that. 100%. I'm just basing it off practice. So that's kind of my high-level thought on it.
Yeah, and in that way, it doesn't even change. That was already true if Jahan was here or not. I think what's fun now, if you're DQ, is you walk into that receiver meeting room today and you go, hey, guys, as you know, we traded Jahan, and that means Sunday's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And Rosemary Jack Saint and Davion Davis and Mitchell Tinsley. Tinsley had a couple of chances in the game against the Dolphins, didn't go his way.
Right.
Now you got a chance, bro. Go out, make plays, make a play, make the team. That's what we're breaking the huddle with in the receiver room Sunday night. Make a play, make the team, because there's a spot available now. I also think it's great news for a guy like Cole Turner, is the 4th tight end. We were debating that spot. It feels like that perhaps is a little easier to do now, as you balance all that stuff out. All right. More coverage on this, obviously, ongoing right now on 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980 live radio. This is what this stuff was made for. So you can check that out on the free Odyssey app. If you're watching on YouTube live right now, let's see, what time is it? It's 12:27. That means B. Mitch and Finley is live on the 106.7 The Fan page. My show will be live on Team 980 page starting at 4, and of course, it's on the radio as well. The Hoffman Show 4 to 7 daily. We will have tons more coverage from all angles. And we'll talk about this more and see how the make the play, make the team turns out on the next edition of Take Command that'll come out on Monday. Thanks so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you then on Take Command.